Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to ground yourself in your emotions. Alright, so as I mentioned in my past two videos, if you caught them, the videos that are coming up are going to be all about grounding yourself in reality, because I think that this is a really important and often overlooked thing about having a spiritual practice. We forget to focus on what's real, what's substantial, what's our body. We tend to get really focused on higher up, more intellectual understandings of things. So I think that this is a really important point to go over here relative to the emotions, because the emotions are an actual physical reality for you. Now, I'm from America, and I don't know if this taboo is throughout the world, so depending on where you come from, it might be a little bit different. But in my culture, there was always sort of this stigma against expressing or having emotions. Like there was always this tendency to think like if you have any kind of strong negative emotions, particularly like sadness or some other emotion like that, and you express it freely, that it's a sign of weakness. So there's like this really strong anti-emotional sentiment that I kind of grew up with growing up in Florida in America. And when we stigmatize emotions, it means that we're not really developing emotional intelligence. We're not actually becoming aware of what's there. It would be as though if we neglected our mind in the same way, it would be as though we had some kind of negative thought about actually developing our intellect, if we thought that becoming more intelligent were a negative thing. So that's the same type of problem if we start ignoring our emotions because we're not developing our emotional intelligence. So this is all about becoming more sensitive, more receptive, and more understanding of the emotions that come up. This has a lot to do with that distinction between spiritual and mundane being really non-existent. So there's really no distinction between something that's spiritual and something that's just everyday and mundane. Also, the bulk of what an emotion is it's a sensation that arises in the body. And so if we're not aware of what our emotions are, or if we have a stigma against emotions, then that's going to leave us at a state of disconnect from our body and thus a disconnect from reality. This is why being able to understand your emotions is a very grounding activity, because you're actually grounding yourself in something that's physical and tangible and real. But there's also another reason why a stigma against having emotions or just a general lack of emotional intelligence is so negative and can affect you in such a negative way. And that's simply because emotions are truly the primary motivator for all actions. So it doesn't matter if you're trying to go out and you're working a 9-to-5 job, or if you decide that you want to start a charity, or if you decide that you want to buy a motorcycle. All of those things are emotionally dependent. So you do those things because you think that in doing those things, there's going to be some kind of positive emotional payoff from that. And then, or you're going to be getting away from some kind of negative emotion that you don't want to experience. And so emotions are actually the motivating factor in our lives, far more motivating than any other thing. So for example, if somebody, let's say, wants to be a rich person, and that's like something that they're really motivated toward, they don't really actually want to be rich. What they want is they want the emotions associated with being rich that they feel like they would feel. Maybe a sense of freedom, maybe a sense of excitement. They want to have those emotions. So they want money from that, but the money is just the means to the end. And even destructive actions that we think, oh, that person doesn't really want to be happy, it's taken for some kind of positive emotional reward. So for example, in the case of somebody, let's say, self-mutilating, they actually want some kind of release from that action. Even if we look at that action and say, oh, that's a really harmful action, why are they doing that? They must not want to be happy, when it's really quite the opposite. Or somebody, here's a really classic example of something destructive. Let's say somebody does drugs in order to self-medicate so that they might be able to feel happy. And this is really something that if you're a human being or really a sentient being, you can't really get away from. So for example, let's say that you're somebody like Mother Teresa, or maybe some other enlightened person, and they did a lot of very good things in the world. What they really wanted is they wanted to feel good in doing that, because other people feeling good makes them feel good. So even emotions is a motivator in those higher up realms, and that's really kind of where you want to get to eventually, where the positive things for other people are making you happy. But let's say we have another really extreme example on the opposite pole. Let's take somebody who's like a serial killer. Even a serial killer goes out and kills somebody because they want to feel some type of positive emotion, maybe some kind of excitement or some bizarre thrill. Maybe they feel like they can't feel positive emotions in some other way, and so that's what they do. So that's a really, really extreme example, of course, but even that has that sentient being thread, that human thread of wanting to feel a positive emotion. Or we'll take a more mundane example, where somebody drags themselves to a job that they hate every single day. And we might say, oh, look at them, they're doing something that they really don't enjoy. But maybe it's the stability from the job, or the fear that something negative will happen, a fear of a negative emotion. And so they keep that really bad job in order to avoid the negative emotion and potentially feel some positivity in their stability. And essentially, people are always going to try to reach to the top shelf emotion that they can experience. And for different people, that's going to be a different emotion. For somebody who is, let's say, in a really bad situation, maybe the most positive emotion that they can feel is safety. Like if somebody's in a war zone, or if somebody is so far under the poverty line in a third world country, where it's like, oh, I've gotten my next meal, and so now I feel safe. Now I feel safe for my life. Or if somebody's in a better situation, maybe the most positive emotion that they can feel is, excitement or love or some other thing on the positive emotion spectrum. So there really isn't any getting away from the fact that emotions are what motivates your every action. This is one of the key factors of being alive as a human being, is that you want to get somewhere in order to feel positive emotion. But what I find is that people lose sight of this fact, and then they start doing an action for the purpose, for the unconscious purpose of going toward a positive emotion. But they forget that what they wanted was the positive emotion, and so they never get the emotional payoff that they're looking for. So for example, let's bring up the example of somebody who goes to a job that they hate. They forget that they want to feel positive in the first place, and so they're not able to make wise decisions as to what's actually going to bring them the emotion that they want. So becoming aware of emotions is one of the most important steps in becoming aware in general. But now that I've explained, why emotions are grounding and why it's so important to be in touch with your emotions, let's explore what emotions actually are, because I find that we sort of have a tendency to think in a very illusory way of emotions, like emotions are some kind of intangible, you can't quite grasp them kind of thing. But emotions are interesting because the primary base of the emotion is an actual tangible reality. It is just as much a part of reality as any physical thing going on. It has like an objective quality to it that you can actually observe. It's not a mental phenomenon. It's not like a thought, like the content of a thought. However, thoughts do play into emotions, but it's actually something that can be observed mindfully without the use of thought. So to kind of boil down the human experience, what we experience all the time, nonstop, and we've never really experienced anything else, is we have our 5 senses. We have our vision, our hearing, our touch sensations, our taste, and our smell. So those are our sensory experiences. And then we have our thought. And our thought is something that's a little bit more nebulous to talk about. It sort of functions sort of like a phantom sensation, sort of like a phantom sensation. So you hear an inner voice, you see inner pictures, you can even imagine how things smell and how things taste. And it sort of allows us to sort of project and have ideas and, a lot of conceptual understanding. And that's one of the really interesting things about being a human being. But all the content within that, that's just the content. But the thought itself, you could think of as another sensation or another sense. And so what happens when you're having an emotion is a physical sensation arises in the body, just like you would feel a pain in your arm if you bumped it, or, let's say if you felt hungry in your stomach. So every emotion starts in that same way. It has a physical quality. And then a split second later, our thoughts sort of go in and make interpretations based upon that. And depending on how your thoughts are oriented toward your emotions, it can be beneficial or it can be detrimental. If your thoughts are, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this, oh, this needs to change, this needs to stop, then that's going to be a problem. But the thought is something that you want to maybe not focus on just yet. Notice that the thought is there, but more so, you don't want to get caught up to where you're forgetting that the emotion actually arose as a physical sensation in the first place. Because oftentimes people forget this body thing that we have, the wisdom of the body. And we immediately start focusing on our mental activity relative to our emotions. So let's say, for example, I feel anger and I feel it in my arms and it's a tightness in my chest, but I forget to focus on that. And I immediately go in my mind and I'm like, oh, this or that or the other person did wrong to me. And then you just get going around and around and around in circles because you're not really addressing the emotion on the level where it primarily occurs, which is in the body. And so you sort of want to check your emotional email, is what I call it. So if the body communicates to you in a particular way through these emotional sensations to let you know how you feel about what's going on out here in reality and to give you the wisdom of the body. So you want to actually tune into that. You want to check your emotional email by focusing your awareness simply on the sensations that arise. And you'll realize that emotions are not quite as complex as you thought. It's only that those two senses of thought and feeling coming together that makes emotion seem very complex and hard to deal with. But if you focus on it just as a sensation, you'll realize, hey, this sensation is not harming me. It's not going to kill me, this sensation. It's just a sensation that I find unpleasant, or maybe a sensation that you find pleasant. Either way, you want to focus your attention toward your body and start focusing on what your emotions are telling you. But the question is, how do we do this on a practical level? And it's actually a really simple process. So you can either sit down for 20 minutes and do this, or you can do this throughout the day when you have a few spare minutes. What you can do is you can take your attention off of your thought, because we have a tendency to be very focused in our thoughts and our mental activity, and we want to become mindful of what's actually going on in reality. And once we do that, we want to focus our attention specifically toward our body, how we feel it, this whole sort of sensory field that we have. And you'll notice that we have physical sensations going on in the body that are non-emotional and physical sensations going on in the body that are emotionally related. And they sort of mix up together. So for example, a non-emotional physical sensation would be like if we feel our heartbeat, or if we feel our stomach rumbling because we're hungry, or if we feel, let's say, a pain in our arm because we bumped it earlier. So that's a non-emotional physical sensation. But there are also emotional sensations going on. So again, with the anger example, maybe we feel a tightness in our upper body, or maybe we notice that we're kind of clenching up a little bit. So that's sort of like our physical sensation thing too, but it's relative to the emotions. Or maybe we feel a heat in our stomach, or a tingling somewhere in our legs. This is what our emotions are actually made of. And our idea of them is just what we superimpose over the emotions. So we've come to label these emotions. So, oh, when I feel this way and my chest is all tight, that's called anger. Or maybe when I have butterflies in my stomach, that's called infatuation. Or we have all these different labels, but you want to forget about those labels. You want to focus just on the sensations themselves. And you want to start to create a habit of doing this once a day, twice a day, whenever you get the opportunity to during your day, because this will actually make you more and more aware of what's going on in your emotions. So an example or an analogy that I would come up with is when I first started learning how to paint, you know, I would look at, let's say, a white wall. If I were going to paint a white wall, I would just have white on my brush. But as you become more and more tuned in to that reality, you can see more subtle colors coming into play and more shades. And so the more I tuned in my awareness to that, I would notice more and more subtle things about that. So instead of just seeing a blank white wall, now I'm seeing a wall with some greens and some blues and a little touch of like gray over here, or maybe some greens I can even be reflected in that, because essentially every surface reflects different colors. And so in the same way that through the act of painting, I was able to become more aware of my visual sensations and to become aware of that aspect of reality, emotions work in the same way. The more that you focus on them, the more subtle nuances you'll notice, and the more wisdom you can glean from your emotions. And when you start becoming more aware of aspects of your reality, actual tangible aspects of your reality, and not just the content of thoughts, that's when you can start to become grounded in reality. And from that vantage point of being grounded, we can sink our roots very, very deep in the earth so that our spirituality tree can grow big and tall and produce lots of good fruit. But we have to be grounded in what's going on here first. Otherwise, we'll just end up being tossed around here and there, and we're not going to really understand what's actually going on. We'll be entertaining a lot of thoughts, we'll be doing a lot of spiritual bypassing, but we won't actually be having tangible results in our life, and it'll actually start impacting us in a negative way. So very, very important to ground yourself in your emotions. Alright, so that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe. Also, check out my blog at thediamondnet.org and sign up for content updates. And until next time, keep becoming more you.